I just read a really good comic book. Okay, so how do I make a video good enough for you guys to actually check something out? Because if there is one reason why I put stuff out, it is because I think it's really awesome, and I think I want to share it with other people. So hopefully I achieved that in this video. So anyway, basically, if you're a fan of or have ever been curious of H.P. Lovecraft, or like if you're a hardcore student of Lovecraft and you've read all of his shit, and you've studied the guy's life and everything like that, then so basically what I'm trying to say is, if you're a big fan of his, or if you're not really that familiar with his stuff, I'm recommending this to you. You can be either one. In fact, if you don't know much about it, it actually will work a little bit better, because there's a discovery aspect to a lot of things that goes on in that. But anyway, the series that I'm talking about is called Providence, and it's written by Alan Moore. It's drawn by Jason Burrows, and publishing started in May, just May, like a couple months ago, 2015, and it was published by Avatar Comics. Avatar, they've done other things notable, such as, which I've talked about, this is the Crossed Plus 100 series, also written by Alan Moore. I like Alan Moore. And let me see, the regular Crossed series, here's a volume 1 trade paperback, which is, really gruesome, which is a thing with Avatar Comics. Like, if you want weird or really violent, crazy stuff, then I would check them out. Another trade paperback that I got, which I have not read yet, but Ferals, basically werewolves and stuff. Interesting to note, Jason Burrows also worked on the Crossed volume that I just picked up. There's different artists, different writers for that, but that's a whole nother video. But basically, Providence is what we're talking about here today. So it's going to be 12 issues monthly, 1 issue a month. It just started in like May, June-ish or whatever. It said May, but I didn't get the comic till later. So they say publishing dates, but you don't get the comic till, a few weeks later and whatnot. Another important thing to note is that each issue is 32 pages, completely ad-free. So every page there's no ads, which is pretty cool. Even though I like looking at old comic books and seeing, like, cheesy ads and stuff like that. But it's nice to know that you're getting the full 32 pages of story. Each issue has 6 variants, or 6 total covers, including the regular cover, which is right here, which is actually quite nice. I guess I'll cut to showing all of the variants and stuff like that. And the regular cover is really nice, actually. The shadows used in there is pretty neat. There's like the Women of H.P. Lovecraft cover. There's a Dreamscape wraparound cover. There's a portrait cover, which is pretty cool. Then there's a Pantheon cover, which is pretty cool. And then, I mean, they're all really nice covers, actually. Whenever I was picking them up at the comic book store, that they don't really get I'm basically the only person with this comic subscription for my box and stuff, so I'm the only person getting it in. And they commented on the covers and stuff, and they thought they were pretty nice too. There is one more variant, but I'm not exactly sure how many issues they're going to print it for. But it's actually pretty cool. It's supposed to be a jumbo print of like a throwback to old like weird pulp, weird fiction magazines and stuff. But those variants are like $9.99 a piece, and I've only seen them for issue 1 and issue 2. And I only recently found out about them whenever I was doing more research to make this video. So those are on the way. They actually look really nice though. Okay, so as far as the story goes, I had a lot of trouble making this video because of the story and the references, and it's so dense. And I'm gonna do my best. I actually sat down and wrote shit out for this video just so that I could do this. I've only read 1 issue, but I was so blown away by it that I had to I felt like I really had to represent this comic book properly and not fuck around and, you know, just spit out some shit and say, go read this comic book. So I'm trying my best to give you the best pitch because it is a very good first issue, and it has a lot of promise for those 12 issues. Anyway, so the story, it follows a journalist named Robert Black, and the location is New York, and the year is 1919, just after the Treaty of Versailles was signed.
The war is over. Into Market Street pour the men and women of the city to celebrate. Up and down the street they parade, delirious with joy, for some of them have come to know the meaning of war. Grotesque and ugly in their influenza masks, the people of San Francisco celebrate. You've seen the signs they carry. Kaiser Wilhelm is Sweet William now. Who is afraid of the Huns? Some of them signs of hate, most of them just outpourings of a great joy. For this day, November 11th, 1918, marks the end of an era of hate and bloodshed and violence. It's the beginning of peace and goodwill on earth. And those who have not died in vain. They've died to make the world safe for democracy. They've swept to victory in the war to end war. And so San Francisco celebrates in 1918 because the war is over and there'll never be another.
The story is has a lot of layers, and it's very implicit. You really have to piece things together. It was actually very hard for me to write out a simple concept of what's going on without giving away too much or going too deep into everything. So that's the basic starting point of the story. And basically Robert Black, he works for a paper called the New York Herald, which it's also important to note that this series follows real places relative to H.P. Lovecraft's life. So, fun fact. Yeah, going back to New York, he works for a paper, Robert Black works for a paper called the New York Herald, and which it was a real place. And so the paper is short on material to print. So in order to fill an empty spot, it's decided that he must pursue this old folk tale, horror story, you know, scary story type thing involving rumors about a book, basically, that after being read, it drove people crazy and they committed suicide. So that's the basic setting for the story. I'll stop there, and hopefully you know, that's a good idea to allow you to go out and read it for yourself and sort of slowly begin to pull back the surface and discover just how deep and dense the material in this issue really is. I just wanted to also mention various bits of information without really sort of getting too sidetracked and spoiling like too much about the story itself. But I just wanted to give a little bit of extra after just establishing the facts and the basic story, so it didn't get all muddied up. That was one of the issues I was running into trying to just talk about it, is I wanted to go all over the place with it. So now that we've established that, here's some other information I came across while researching more about it, because after you read it, you're going to want to know, you know, more about it. I mean, Alan Moore spent like 2+ years preparing for this, so there's a lot of fucking detail in this comic book series. So again, I really think you should check it out. If everything I said sounds like something you prefer, if you like reading you know, Sonic comics,
I apologize,
or Nintendo comics, who am I talking about, then I don't know, this probably isn't up your alley. But anyway, so going back into the details, Alan Moore, he's dabbled in Lovecraft related material in the past. There was a publication called The Courtyard in 2003, and there was a follow-up called The Neonomicon in 2010, which was a sequel to The Courtyard. Even before The Courtyard, Alan Moore, he had written material for a Lovecraft tribute called Starry Wisdom in like '94, and he had planned to write a whole book based on Lovecraft's fungi from Yuggoth cycle of poems, but he apparently lost basically almost all of the originals, which were the only copies of that material, in a taxi cab, unfortunately. But there was like some material left that he didn't lose, and it was later published by Avatar in 2003 with some anthology thing. I'm not exactly sure. I'm slightly interested in that, but from what I could tell, there was only very little, and it didn't really seem worth pursuing. So there it is if you're interested. But I do think you should get the trade paperback of Neonomicon over at Avatar Comics or whatever the fuck. It's $19.99, but the Neonomicon trade paperback that I'm mentioning, it includes The Courtyard, which was like, it's very small, it's very short. I've not read either one of those yet, but I have come across information doing research for this video to better inform you on an awesome series. And it definitely seems compelling. The Neonomicon follows like a FBI investigator or a detective, I forget which one. But anyway, I was instantly thinking of X-Files, is basically. And then I came across some like some hardcore like censorship, like people were outraged at Neonomicon because there was this brutal controversial like extended rape scene that is like several pages long or whatever. So whenever I read all that, I was like, yep, that's gonna be, I'm gonna pick that up soon. So eventually I'll get to read that. Going back to the actual issue of Providence, I did want to share, without spoiling anything, probably one of my favorite parts of the comic, without actually spoiling anything and showing you the last panel, which has nudity in it. So this is called, this is at the end of the book, and it says Commonplace Book, okay? And what a commonplace book is something that writers use to store random notes, dreams, ideas, and like I'd never known that's what those were called, and I've basically kept one of those pretty much my entire life, since I could really write coherent thoughts, you know. And I've actually, not recently, but fairly recently, you know, gotten myself one to keep just that, because I had been writing in you know, my phone, text, you know, like files, computer stuff, and all that stuff just kind of like annoyed me. So even though, like, yeah, it's a piece of paper and it's a book that somebody else can pick up and read, you know, at any time, there's something to be said about people that like to write, such as myself, for a piece of pen, or a pen and a piece of paper. So anyway, so there's that. So it was really kind of like a moment of connection with the character and the book itself. So there's all these things going on in the book to sort of draw you in, or at least like a certain type of reader, I would think. So I really enjoyed that whole section of the comic, which was actually quite revealing as far as his personality goes. And that's all I'll say about that.
The perfect liar, joyful and sincere.
Okay, now we're getting into the real interesting stuff that's related to this comic, which was really fucking me up trying to sit there and talk about it on the fly instead of having to sit down and write something. So I hope you fucking appreciate it, because I wrote 3.5 fucking pages of shit. So basically, another interesting bit of information is the primary focus of the plot heavily references a book by Robert Chambers called The King in Yellow. Another book I haven't yet read, but again, it's on the way. I'll get to all this shit. I have a bunch of shit to read everywhere, okay? I like to be stocked up. Anyway, The King in Yellow, which is also about, it's a play within a book, which apparently it induces despair or madness in those who read it. And if you've watched season 1 of the True Detective series, which is really fucking awesome, they just started doing season 2, which episode 2, holy shit, what the fuck's gonna happen? I didn't see that coming. Anyway, so season 1 with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, who are also the producers of the show, highly recommend. That's like some of the best shit I've ever seen in my life. If it was a movie, it would basically be the best movie I've ever seen. It would be in that top 10 of solid, awesome, badass movies. Anyway, so going back to this, in season 1, if you've seen it, then you'll know that the same book, the King in Yellow, is also heavily referenced, and it's important to note that Providence was entirely completed long before that True Detective. So it's kind of interesting, you know, the two mediums, you know, sort of referencing the same thing and being really good. The King in Yellow is also important since it's actually very important because H.P. Lovecraft himself was inspired by it, basically, and even sort of like I think he sort of ripped off some of the ideas influenced by, same thing, right? So that's a very key book to have when it comes to weird fiction and horror, I guess. Technically it's weird fiction, I guess. But finally, I'd just like to mention that Thomas Ligotti, this motherfucker right here, I love this guy. Okay, this guy and this book, I recommend this book. Well, I was going to do a whole video just on Thomas Ligotti stuff as soon as I could get through it all, and you know, but it's a lot of stuff and you can't read it fast. But anyway, Thomas Ligotti is also, he's an American author, and he was influenced by Lovecraft. And like I said, I'll be doing a video on just him, and in the future at some point, whenever I read all this shit, digest it, probably have to write some stuff down for that too. But Thomas Ligotti's writing also directly influenced the writer for True Detective's character, who's played by Matthew McConaughey. This sort of pessimistic, brutal outlook on life that's actually very real and kind of scary to some people. But basically, the Matthew McConaughey's character actually line for line spoke some Thomas Ligotti stuff in the series, and then the Thomas Ligotti is actually becoming an author of interest because of, you know, basically the writer of True Detective, copywriting, you know, in a sense, you know, Thomas Ligotti's writing, which was influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, who was influenced by you know, the King in Yellow, or whatever the fuck. So it's like all this shit's just like, you know, related and stuff like that. So basically, Ligotti, you know, he's a personal favorite of mine, and I highly suggest Providence, the comic that we're talking about here today, amongst other things. H.P. Lovecraft, of course, and True Detective, badass show, and of course Thomas Ligotti. And just finally, I just was gonna mention that I would include links to you know, important information, interviews by Alan Moore talking about Providence, links to relevant places to purchase most of the material that I mention, or feel like linking to. I recommend, again, you know, searching all this stuff out yourself. Basically everything I've talked about, in order to better assist you in uncovering the true monsters